No, forever, right? People are like 7 to 9 hours. That's what you should shoot for every night for sleep.
We know that when you're sleeping less than 6 hours and more than 9 hours, it increases your risk for dying from everything.
The trackers, are they a good or a bad idea, and how accurate are they?
Many times people are in this quest for perfect sleep. It's something that is called orthosomnia.
Oh my gosh, I think I had that because I called you one time and I was like, my tracker says I'm only getting X amount of sleep. All right. We're going to get to all of that in just a moment. But first, I want you to know how grateful I am for today's podcast sponsor, my friends at FitAF Nutrition. They are Eastern Pennsylvania's leading meal prep company. FitAF offers meals of multiple sizes for people with various health goals. And you know what I love about this company? They use high-quality ingredients like grass-fed meats, wild fish, and locally harvested produce. And all right, for you parents on the go, they even offer family meals. Go to fitafnutrition.com, place your order by Thursday at midnight, and get fresh, prepared meals delivered right to your door on Sunday. Use code RLECKY at checkout and get 20% off your first order. Here we go, buddy.
It's the Ryan Leckey Show.
Hey, what's going on, fam? Welcome back. Super jacked up about today's podcast. Maybe because I had a great night's sleep. And that's what we're diving into today. But specifically, just when you think all the buzz is about 7 to 9 hours, and that's all you need for great sleep health, think again. New research just out might have you maybe questioning that. Plus, sleep apnea and the weight loss drug that's helping people lose weight and maybe help with their sleep apnea. We're pulling back the curtain on it all with the one and only, my favorite sleep guru, Dr. Marie Morse in the house. She is a pediatric neurologist and also a sleep medicine specialist at Geisinger. But you also kind of help run the show there. What's your title?
So I'm the director of child neurology and pediatric sleep medicine at Geisinger.
And I should point out right away as well, you also have a podcast that's all things sleep called
Sleeping Around the Podcast.
Available on your favorite platforms. Okay, so let's get right to it. We don't want to bury the lead. When you and I had a conversation, we check in regularly because I'm like, what are you up to? Do you have any new research, right? You were telling me, forever, right? People are like 7 to 9 hours. That's what you should shoot for every night for sleep.
Yes.
Okay, are we doing it wrong? Or what's this new research that's coming out that could have us being like, what?
Yes. So first and foremost, we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater of saying that 7 to 9 hours isn't what the average adult should be shooting for. We know that when you're sleeping less than 6 hours and more than 9 hours, it increases your risk for dying from everything. However, the most recent literature that has been published was back in January of this year, has demonstrated the regularity of sleep is even more important than just the duration of sleep. So what does that mean? It means that the more that you're going to bed and waking up within the same time frame, night to night, without there being kind of random napping or big swings of like, sometimes I go to bed at 9, sometimes I go to bed at midnight, that is going to actually be more protective for you than anything else. So this was a fascinating study. They actually utilized a big biobank out of the United Kingdom. It's called the UK Biobank. It had over 60,000 participants and 10 million hours of accelerometry. So accelerometry is like you're wearing a Fitbit, you're wearing an Apple Watch, the thing that tells you whether you're asleep or you're awake. They analyzed this, followed people forward, and then did something called a survival curve, meaning if I follow you out for 8 years, are you still alive? And what they found is that those individuals who had what looked like an irregular sleep-wake schedule, meaning like there's no predictability, their risk of dying from everything was anywhere from 20 to 50% higher than those who had very regular duration
Wait,
of sleep.
you said 20 to 50% higher, but what types of things are we talking about? Is it stroke?
Everything.
Is it increasing cardiac disease?
So cardiovascular, cancer-related, you name it, and it's going to be higher likelihood for that to occur. Now, this makes a lot of sense. Now, the reason why is because there is nothing in isolation that is good for you, right? If I said to you, only focus on diet, don't worry about exercise. Number one, I know you would crawl out of your skin. But number two, that would be completely misleading if you thought that that was going to be the only thing that optimized your body's health. When you're talking about sleep, it's not just duration that matters. For years, we've defined sleep health as duration, quality of sleep and of wakefulness, sleep regularity, and how consistent you are on a night-to-night basis. So with that stated, this isn't really surprising data. Now, why does regularity probably make a bigger difference than duration? Well, that's because since 2017, there was a Nobel Prize that went to 3 men who identified and characterized the molecular process, or basically how these things work, called clock genes. Clock genes tell every single cell in our body when they should be doing what. So there is a natural day-night rhythm for every single cellular function in your body, which then produces a day-night rhythm for both wellness and disease. So most people will have a bowel movement, for instance, right, at 8 a.m. We tend to think that that's because we had our coffee. Had nothing to do with your coffee. It had to do with the fact that you're most likely to have that type of activity in that time frame. If I were to look at every single thing in our body, that what it does, there is a way that you can map it across 24 hours to say, this is the most likely time for you to experience this.
So at the end of the day though, right, so sleep duration still important, or that
Yes.
hasn't changed? So the 7 to 9 still important, but I think if we go even deeper on the regularity, right, this is research, this new research, this is gonna, I mean, obviously this impacts a lot of shift workers, right? Because there's so many people
Sure.
who might work 11 to 7 X amount of days and then they try to live like a normal life.
Yeah.
I mean, there's like no way around that.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting about shift work disorder specifically is that in 2007, the World Health Organization actually declared shift work disorder as a likely carcinogen, a likely cancer-causing agent. And again, this goes back to the idea that our bodies are designed to function in a very specific pattern. It's kind of like I can drive my car out of alignment until I can't anymore because my axle broke, right? So the same thing is true when you have a person who's trying to function outside of the circadian or day-night alignment that they're designed to do.
So ultimately, when you say regularity, this is telling people who have the availability, who might work a 9 to 5 job, right? If you can go to bed every night at 8 or 9 o'clock at night, and you're always getting up at 5 o'clock,
Yeah.
that could reduce the risk of what?
Everything. It can reduce the risk of everything. It can reduce the risk of heart attack, of stroke, of obesity, of diabetes. You name the condition, it will reduce that risk because your body is functioning more in alignment with what it's supposed to. The thing that I think people, the average person who's watching this, I would say to them, your irregularity most likely comes Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Monday through Friday, Monday through Thursday, likely, you're probably going to bed at the same exact time and waking up at the same exact time. The weekend comes and we throw that all out the window. We're going to quote unquote sleep in because I deserve it. It's restorative. I'm catching up on sleep.
But I can't do that. Some people can't. Do you ever
Yes.
meet people who are like, oh, I can sleep in tomorrow, and they will sleep till 9 or 10. If I go to bed at 8, I'm up at 4:30 or 5. If I go to bed at midnight, I'm up at 4:30 to 5.
Yes, and that's because your body probably has a very strong circadian influence because you've trained it to be reinforced.
So my circadian rhythm could almost be like a type A personality.
Well, there's no doubt about that.
Got it.
But the thing is that many of us are doing that, and the reason that we're doing that is not because our bodies need to sleep in. It's because of the fact that we generally are compromising on the duration and quality of sleep the remainder of the week. So if you look at the Gallup polls that were done this past year to say, what is the average American sleeping? More than 60% of Americans are getting less than 6 hours of sleep. Now, when you look at that, you would say, well, you just said that that's not as important as circadian, right? As regularity. The two you can't separate, because if I am sleeping less than what I'm supposed to, I'm making myself more tired, and so therefore I'm going to be more subjected to inappropriate napping and then having those sleeping in events. So even though I'm telling you regularity, it's not dismissing the idea that having the duration that you need is still critically important, because when you start compromising on that, your regularity is going to definitely go out the window.
And what I loved, you taught me this a long time ago, when you don't get enough sleep, less than 6 hours, you are giving less of yourself to you and everybody around you.
Yes.
I love that.
You're accepting a lesser version of who you can be.
That was the exact quote.
Yes.
But I think ultimately, because some people are like, oh, I can function on 5 hours of sleep, right?
Yep.
But there is actually research that shows only a small percentage of people can function on how many hours, but actually be cognitively all there and firing at like 100%.
I would say that the majority of people are not going to be able to do that. When we see there's a very, very small percentage of individuals who genetically may be short sleepers. So going back to those clock genes, right? There are gene variations. So your genes are your DNA, instructions for your body. And so if you have a variation in a gene that your instructions say you can get away potentially with this lesser hour of sleep, you're a very, very small minority of people, right? So probably less than 1%. Now, what we need to remember is that there are clear studies that have looked at when I start restricting sleep, how does this negatively impact me? So there was a very interesting study done where we looked at, let's force someone to stay awake, and then let's compare them to someone who's drinking alcohol. And so they followed these people hour by hour and had them then do tasks to see what is their reaction time, what is their speed, what is their accuracy, what is their neurocognitive performance. What they had found is that the people who are sleep deprived actually fall off a cliff a lot quicker than the person who becomes intoxicated. So it's not advocating to go and drive your car drunk, but it's giving you the level playing ground that when you start curtailing your sleep and start compromising on your sleep, you're giving the same level of yourself as if you were walking in after you just had 2 martinis. So the reality is that you would never accept that. You would never allow your friend to get behind the wheel after having a big boozing party at a bar. But yet, we're encouraging one another or almost glorifying when we're sleep deprived and having very irregular sleep schedules and compromising on our sleep. But yet, we're performing the same as if we were buzzed or drunk.
So something, because I follow your social media channels, you speak all over the world as a sleep expert, right? Because you also are like, is it right? You're one of like 14 certain experts in the country. Like I always play that. What is that?
So there's a few dozen of us, but being a child neurologist and a sleep medicine specialist. So most sleep medicine specialists tend to be pulmonologists or lung doctors. There are some adult neurologists, but my technical training is I'm an adult neurologist with special training in child neurology, and then I'm specially trained also in sleep medicine. And then my specific area of expertise is within a condition called central disorders of hypersomnolence. So conditions like narcolepsy, idiopathic hypersomnia, Klein-Levin syndrome. So these are conditions where people are very, very sleepy and tend to also have very irregular sleep schedules.
And I know when you're doing these talks and speeches and workshops with healthcare professionals, other people all over the world, I'm sure somebody has come up to you and said, I'm a shift worker. You're saying it's all about regularity. I can't get that, so I can't bury the lead. What do you do? Sure. So if you're somebody who's a nurse, right, you're working 11 to 7 X amount of days, and then you have a few days off and they try to transition back, like what's your advice as a sleep expert?
Sure. So for people who are working shift work, first and foremost, by definition, that's a sleep disorder. And so I would strongly encourage partnering with a sleep professional to, number one, make sure there's not other sleep disorders, because many times people can have more than one. But number two, there's both lifestyle as well as medications that we may make a recommendation to utilize that will help you to perform better, but also to be able to be more likely to sleep when you have the opportunity to sleep. The big challenge is a person might be working a shift that's maybe an overnight shift, and now they have the opportunity during the day to sleep. However, they have other responsibilities. So now, and when they go to lay down, they are still too kind of amped up from just finishing a shift. And so we sometimes will be using medications to help them sleep. And then we also sometimes may utilize medications to help them be more awake and have more of a consistent cognitive performance. The most important thing is to make sure that there's not big swings in your shifts. We really try to encourage people that if you are going to be a shift worker, try to be consistent with the shift that you are having. What's very dangerous is when people are on like 2 nights of overnight, and then the third day they're now on a morning shift. That is probably one of the most hazardous, because your body can't respond that quickly to be able to now just automatically shift to, you were awake for 2 nights in a row and now you're going to take the first morning shift. That's not a safe transition for you.
And coming back to what you said earlier about regularity, who was the organization that did this study that came out the beginning of 2024?
So the data was out of the UK Biobank. So this is a very large effort that was done in the United Kingdom that collected both genetic information as well as a bunch of variables that people voluntarily completed with different surveys and wearing kind of like fitness type watches and things to be able to track.
And speaking of the trackers, right? Because
Sure.
I've asked you this question before. Are they a good or a bad idea, and how accurate are they?
Sure. So it depends on what you're utilizing them for. So one of the things that's really fascinating since sleep is becoming more and more of a hot topic, which I think is great.
Yeah, because sleep science isn't that old.
No, it's not. It's not. Only since the 1970s has it actually been an established field. And it's only been since the 1950s that we really started to understand the different even phases of sleep. So when you look at that, one of the cautions that we have is that many times people are in this quest for perfect sleep. It's something that is called orthosomnia. So,
Oh my gosh, I think I had that because I called you one time and I was like, my tracker says I'm only getting X amount of sleep and my HRV isn't low enough, but
yes. Yes, and that is a very common thing we see. Is
What is it called?
Orthosomnia.
Orthosomnia. And that's
Yes.
the perfection for perfect sleep?
Yes, yeah. So it's on the quest for perfect sleep.
It's me.
And so the biggest challenge that I find with some people is that I wake up, I feel great. Oh my God, what a great night's sleep. And then I look at my tracker and it says I had a sleep score of 70. And that was a really bad sleep. Oh my goodness. Yeah, you know what? I think I did wake up.
So it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy that you start going down the rabbit hole and saying, nope,
Yes.
my data says I didn't sleep well.
But it also is negatively not validating, right? How you're feeling, right? So you woke up feeling great, and then you look at this device that tells you you didn't. And so now you've changed what your experience is, right? And so it's important to validate how you're feeling. But if you're getting information from something that is not as important. So if you woke up and you felt great and you're like, I can take on the day, but then you had some random variable that said, think twice about that. What value is that bringing to you, right? So the caution with some of these trackers is that, one, people have differences in sleep night to night. That's expected. They are pretty good, relatively consistent with actigraphy, is which I use medically in the hospital. It's a FDA cleared device to be able to wear, and it will give me an estimate of when you're asleep and when you're awake, with the risk of overestimating sleep, because if I sit still long enough, it may think that I'm asleep.
And what device is this called?
And so it's called actigraphy. That's the kind of class of
Is this like something that's in our Fitbits or Oura Rings?
So accelerometry is what's in those. And so actigraphy is just kind of the class. And so accelerometry basically is looking at movement in space and over time, right? And so if I'm moving around, I likely am not sleeping, where if I'm laying there long enough. Now, some of these devices have become even more intelligent. And to your point, with heart rate variability, we're recognizing that they can utilize some of these other variables that we know change overnight. So your heart beating, so what your heart rate is, that can change overnight when you're asleep. Your oxygenation. So looking at not only your movement, but also whether you're seeing these other changes, that can further verify whether you're asleep or you're awake. So what I would say be cautious with are when the devices are trying to claim that they can tell you what stage of sleep you are in, and then also these things with these sleep scores, those are made up. So there is no sleep score in medicine, number one, but number two, there's nothing to say what makes something a good sleep score versus a bad sleep score. And so being very cautious with interpreting those things. So if you want to get a sense of, am I having that regularity of sleep? They'll be good for that. But if you're having challenges and you just keep looking at this device and it's not helping you to get better, your call to action is really to partner with a sleep physician to help better understand and dissect what are the options, what are the lifestyle options and the behavior options, but then do you need any other types of interventions to better improve your sleep?
Orthosomnia?
Orthosomnia.
That's the goal, to try to be perfect with your sleep.
Yes.
And that's why also when you and I had a phone chat, you're like, I want you to take a break from your tracker.
Exactly.
And I did.
Exactly.
I did, because I would wake up, just what you said, you hit the nail on the head. I'd be like, man, I feel great. And I'd look at him and be like, what do you mean my HRV wasn't low? Or I only slept in REM X amount of time.
Yes.
So what's interesting, because there's so many different products on the market that do offer a sleep score, there's nothing really scientifically or anything on the medical books that sleep medicine specialists like you say this is an accurate thing. They don't exist.
Yeah.
So what are these companies, they kind of just come up with it?
It's a marketing strategy, right?
And we all
So-
bit into that.
Well, I mean, if you think about how do I actually engage and change behavior, it's giving a reinforcement to utilizing it, right?
Yeah.
And so if all I did was just give you, this is your sleep data, but you didn't know how to utilize it, right? You're going to stop using it. Where if I give you some made up variable that makes you feel like I can do something with it, right? We're all trained to want to get good grades in school, right? Getting 100 versus getting a 60. We already have that positive Pavlovian reinforcement of like, I want that, I want that, I want that. So if I now give you a device that tells you you can have a score between 0 and 100, you're going to want to keep trying to get that 100.
Yeah.
It almost becomes a game. And so a lot of these different devices have done variations on this. The ones that I think are probably the most helpful is not necessarily to score themselves, but whether there's some positive information that those devices can give. So Fitbit had this for a bit, where if you were utilizing it for sleep and they started to see like, hey, last night it took you an hour to fall asleep. Tonight, why don't you consider doing XYZ wind down activity in order to be able to fall asleep easier? Those types of things are positive, right? Because they're helping you, they're giving you strategies to potentially improve on your sleep because it's identifying a change in your behavior. Where when it's just giving you a random score and it's not necessarily giving any context to that score, it's not providing any type of positive behavioral intervention that's going to make any type of substantial change for you.
So let me ask you this, with all the research that came out about regularity, is there anything, I guess, that has changed with winding down at night, right? There was so much stuff like get off of your phone an hour before bed, stop the TV an hour before bed. Has any of that changed at all?
So it's interesting. This actually has become a really, really hot topic.
Because
right
some
now.
people say like, oh, you can be on your phone right before bed if you're wearing blue light blocking glasses, or if
Yes.
you push that button on your iPhone that puts it in the night mode.
Yes.
So you as an expert, like,
Yeah.
tell me about that.
So it's interesting. So this past June at the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, I was a part of the postgraduate course for pediatrics, and we had discussed the exposome and how it influences your sleep. And I used my talk was on exposome strategies to improve sleep. So what's the exposome? It is exactly what it sounds like. Everything you are exposed to. So whether it's pollution, light, sound, farm animals, makeup, everything your body is exposed to has an influence in how healthy you are, right? And so one of the things that's very interesting is in regards to what you should be doing right before bed, and should you be using blue light blocking glasses? Does the phone dimmer, does that make a difference? What's very, very interesting is this is intently debated right now because there is a lot of data saying what we thought mattered doesn't necessarily matter as much as what we had put an emphasis on. So things like melatonin supplementation and the blue light blockers. So first and foremost, blue light blocking glasses absolutely do not do anything. So throw them out.
Whoa, hold on. I'm like, pump the brakes.
Yeah.
Blue light blocking glasses, right? That
absolutely
we
nothing.
all wear at night, or I even wear when I work and other
Yep.
stuff because it's
Do nothing.
Who's saying that? That's
All of the research is demonstrating that it actually does not make a difference in your ability to fall asleep, stay asleep.
get
at all.
out. So even flipping that little nighttime button on your phone that's supposed to remove the blue light.
So what's very interesting is that what is actually being suggested right now is that it's less about this very specific time frame, and it's more of a dose dependence across the day. So many of us are not actually getting the appropriate dynamic spectral lighting across the day. What I mean by that is that if you think about lighting, it's kind of that Roy G. Biv, right? Red, orange, yellow, blue, indigo, violet. The blue light is the one that is more associated with like daylight and is that very, very bright light. If you think about the majority of lighting that our eyes are exposed to throughout the day, it's usually including that. So like those LED lights and all of that. What has been suggested that is probably more beneficial is potentially some dynamic spectral lighting. What does that mean? It means that it's intelligent lighting that in the daytime is that very, very bright, but as the day progresses, it starts to get more towards the red spectrum of light, and that actually may be better for facilitating falling asleep and staying asleep. So even studies have looked at, like for children who have like night lights, that night lights in the room, even though it's a small light, that can contribute to more sleep fragmentation, more arousals throughout the night. Where if you replace that with a red light instead, that it actually can facilitate better night sleep.
I was just going to ask that.
Yeah.
So the nightlight, maybe try but is there a lot of research that like, oh, red's the way to go?
So that's what the current suggestions are. And so what is interesting is that there are a lot of researchers right now who are stating that it's not so much, oh, I need to limit this blue light right now. It's that I need to get the right exposure across the day so that I'm aligning with what my circadian is, right? So if I'm just like only focusing on this 1 hour, it's kind of like saying, I'm going to diet Monday through Friday, but Saturday and Sunday, I'm going to eat 30,000 calories. Yeah. It completely negates everything else you're doing. So if you're not exposing yourself to the right lighting throughout the day and only focusing on that 1 hour, it really is probably not making the big of difference. And when we're talking about what we're doing on our cell phones, many times it's the content more than the lighting that is actually making our sleep problem, right? So if you think about social media has been intentionally designed to look like something else that if you were to go to, let's say, Mohegan Sun, that is very addictive. Slot machines, right? I go like this, and why are slot machines so enticing for people?
Because you're trying to win.
You're trying to win, and you get intermittent rewarding, right? So I do this, I do this,
it's
I do this.
the dopamine hit from
and
slots
then
like
I get this reward. The same thing is true with the scrolling, right? I scroll. I'm going to put it down. Oh my God, that's so funny. That gives you that dopamine surge. You want to now do that more. And unfortunately, just like anything else that is hitting that reward pathway, it takes more of the reward every time for us to have that same euphoric experience.
But
right?
watching something that doesn't maybe give you a dopamine hit kind of just chills you out. I think this is crazy we're having this conversation because, you know, for years I would tell my partner, Matt, right, before we're going to sleep, he's watching YouTube videos and stuff. I'm like, you should be off your phone an hour before bed. But now, I mean, with a lot of the research, it's like it really doesn't matter.
So it's more so making sure that it's not something that's going to compromise your ability to go to bed. Because many times what's happening is people are like, I just need to wind down. Mm-hmm. And then next thing they know, it's 4 hours later.
Yeah.
Right?
You're memeing your friends. You're DMing people like funny stuff.
So that is going to delay you from going to sleep, right? So it's not that necessarily, it's that hour turns into 4 hours.
It's the rabbit hole you go down.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So I think what's so fascinating about this research when it comes to regularity, it's like the increased risk of cardiovascular disease, stroke. You said up to 50% for people who just aren't consistent with their sleep.
So when we're talking about the individuals who are the highest risk,
right,
there was no predictability to their sleep, right?
Because I guess I'm wondering,
they were sleeping all across 24 hours in fragments, right?
Yeah.
So I want to make sure that I'm also not fear-mongering where people are like, oh my gosh, I can never sleep in. What we're saying is that if you're able to go to bed and wake up within an hour of that time frame, night to night, 7 days a week, that's the best, right? That's what our goal is. That's what we always are educating on. Like if your bedtime is typically 9 o'clock, the earliest going to bed 8, the latest going to bed 10. If you're normally waking up at 6 a.m., the earliest waking up 5, the latest waking up 7.
So like an hour window.
Yep. No one on earth has the same bedtime and wake time 7 days a week. It's impossible. There are other things that are going to play into that. That does not mean you're going to die tomorrow. What is important is to try and make sure that you're giving yourself as much predictability as possible because your body likes predictability. When you start throwing in these major variations, your body doesn't know how to respond to it because it's used to doing the same process over and over again. And so now it has to try and compensate. When your body's trying to compensate more and more, that's when we start seeing disease sneak in. So it doesn't mean that if you were to go on vacation tomorrow for a week.
And you have one late night or two.
Yeah, or even if on that week, you normally go to bed at 9 and you're staying up till 12, 1 o'clock and sleeping in on that week, recognize that's fine while you're on vacation for that week. It's when you come back making sure that you don't stay into the same dysfunctional pattern, but that you try really hard to get yourself back into it. What we tend to find most typically, and we see this in children, adolescents, and adults, is this huge variation from weekdays to weekends. And that many times is now going to creep in to how you wake up on Monday. So what I mean by that is that I normally go to bed at 9. I usually wake up at, let's say, 6. It's the weekend, it's Sunday, I wake up now at 11. You're not going to bed at 9. Your body's not going to be ready to go to bed at 9. So instead, you're going to be laying in your bed, feeling frustrated, not being able to fall asleep later, but you still have to wake up on Monday for work. So 6 a.m. comes, you now have insufficiently slept, and you now have given yourself the case of the Mondays because of the fact that you didn't sleep well. And so now you make the association with Monday that Mondays suck. No, Mondays don't suck. Mondays can actually be quite great. It's that you slept terribly because of the choices that were made, and you actually are fully in control of preventing a sucky Monday.
I love that. Let's talk now, changing from sleep regularity. So the takeaway from that is if you can be as consistent as possible,
Definitely.
that's what leads to better sleep health.
Yes.
Right?
Well, making sure you're really looking at all those factors,
And
right?
still trying to get the 7 to 9, but
duration,
regularity
quality.
is the most.
Yes. Exactly.
So sleeping over 9 hours is not a good thing for people.
So sleeping over 9 hours for an adult would be a concerning sign that there's either a problem with the quality of your sleep or that you may have a hypersomnolence disorder. So something that you're programmed to be more sleepy than others. And so that also has been associated with there potentially being increased health risk.
Okay. Before we move on to weight loss drugs and sleep apnea, I wanted to ask you touched on melatonin earlier.
Yes.
What's some of the science out with melatonin? Because we were talking and you said there's actually some new research talking about how much melatonin, because I know sometimes if people can sleep, they take it. I know, people, even in my family, who would take it and they'd have like these whacked out dreams where they're not taking enough. Does it not work for them? What does all the data say about melatonin?
Yeah, so melatonin is a very, very complex hormone. And there has been a lot of different studies that we still are completely unclear as to what is the optimal dosing, optimal timing, and what are you actually treating with it, right? So when you look at melatonin from a sleep perspective, it has two potential properties. One property is something as a chronobiologic, and I'll explain that in a moment, and the other is as hypnotic. A chronobiologic means it's affecting the circadian rhythm, that day-night rhythm, and so I can shift a circadian rhythm by potentially utilizing melatonin. A hypnotic means I put you to sleep. At higher doses, it acts as a hypnotic. Many times we're saying like 5, 10 milligrams, that would be higher dose. When we're looking at chronobiologics, we generally are saying 0.5 to maximum maybe 3 milligrams, and we're taking it several hours before bedtime, many times about 6 hours before bedtime, because we're trying to shift someone's circadian rhythm. Or when I'm using it as a hypnotic, I'm usually using it at bedtime, 20 minutes before bedtime, to force someone to fall asleep. Now, this is where I would say there's even more things that it does that we don't fully understand. We use it at higher doses, like 15 milligrams, in some people who have a condition called REM behavior disorder. REM behavior disorder, REM sleep, is rapid eye movement sleep. This is a stage of sleep where we have very vivid dreaming, and during this vivid dreaming and during REM sleep, we should experience something called REM atonia, meaning our bodies physically are paralyzed, can't move. People have REM behavior disorder, they don't have this REM atonia, they act out their dreams. And so many times these dreams are very combative, confrontational, punching, kicking, patients even like trying to jump out of their bed, running out of the house. And so with that, we can use high dose melatonin to potentially treat REM behavior disorder. So there's all of these variations. Now, the part that of melatonin that's fascinating is it does something more that we don't fully understand, because it also has antioxidant properties. And so it also has been suggested in some other areas where it may be beneficial at super, super high doses, like thousands of milligrams for some different neurologic diseases and otherwise. So I'm not telling people to take thousands of milligrams of melatonin, but what I'm saying is that there is research being conducted to better understand who and what should be utilized. Now, if you're a person who's watching this and you're taking melatonin, the first thing I always like to ask is, why are you taking melatonin? Many times people are taking it because they have chronic issues, falling asleep, staying asleep, waking up feeling sleepy. If you're taking this medication and you're not finding substantial changes, you may be taking the wrong solution, right? You may be utilizing something that is actually not benefiting you. When we're utilizing this in the clinic, many times it's going to be for someone who has a circadian rhythm disorder, and we're trying to reduce the time it takes you to fall asleep. If I do that, I generally am going to use it for several weeks and then reevaluate whether or not you still need to use it, then potentially try and take you off of it. There are some conditions where we need to use it longer term, but the take-home message I generally tell people before reaching for something over the counter because of a chronic sleep problem, talk to a sleep physician, because there are over 70 different sleep disorders that exist in your International Classification of Sleep Disorders Edition 3. Melatonin doesn't treat them all.
Wow, 70. That's crazy. crazy. And speaking of sleep now, another knowledge bomb you have, weight loss drugs and sleep apnea. Pull back the curtain.
Yeah.
What's this new research?
So this is one of the biggest phase 3 studies that really has taken over not only medical media, but lay media as well. We're talking about the study done by Eli Lilly. They have a drug called tirzepatide. The name that many people may know is Zepbound as a weight loss drug. And so they did a very large phase 3 study. So phase 3 study means that they're doing kind of a randomized control trial, and they're really trying to prove to the FDA that their drug makes a difference compared to doing nothing at all, right? And so it was individuals who were overweight to obese, who had obstructive sleep apnea, and there were 2 studies that were done. One was there were patients and they had OSA, they just didn't use their CPAP. They didn't want to, or whatever it might have been. And then the second group was they were adherent CPAP users, meaning that they were utilizing their CPAP nightly for at least 4 hours a night. What did they find? They found that in addition to substantial weight loss, anywhere between 16 to 20% body weight, right? They also saw a 55 to almost 65% reduction in AHI. So that is your sleep disordered breathing number. It stands for apnea-hypopnea index, how many times an hour I'm having breathing difficulties. And so what's interesting is that when we look at what is kind of the expected reduction in your AHI with weight loss if you're overweight, we say for every 1% change in body weight, we expect a 2.6% change in AHI. So we expect that reduction in your breathing number. What this study is demonstrating is that, yes, we saw weight loss, which is great, means I'm treating more to the cause for those individuals, but we saw an even more substantial deduction in the AHI than what that weight loss is. So the 1 to 2.6, we were seeing it was more like a 1 to 4. Right? So it was showing that there was a benefit. Now, what's fascinating about this class of drug is that this class of drug by itself has really taken the world by storm. So the class of drug is these GLP-1 agonists. This particular drug is a GLP-1 GIP agonist. GLP-1 is something that really is supposed to tell your body you're not hungry anymore, you don't want to eat, it slows down your digestion so you stay full longer. But GLP-1 also is a hormone that interacts not only in your body systemically, but also works in your brain. And so for myself, another neurotransmitter or brain signaler that is super important is this one called orexin. And orexin is something that helps in promoting wakefulness. It also may help in facilitating more stabilization in sleep, but it also is a part of that reward pathway as well. What we see is that GLP-1 has direct and indirect interactions, meaning it works directly on orexin, but then also takes kind of a circuitous route to work on orexin. So even before this study was done, we knew that patients were experiencing this interaction because if you have friends who have been on these meds, I can tell you that they very typically will say things like, yeah, no, I've lost weight, and you know what, I don't even have a craving for wine anymore. And I'm like, that's terrible, I'm so sorry. But that is really more of that orexin effect of that it's reducing that reward pathway. When we're seeing what is going on with patients in obstructive sleep apnea, it's likely more than just the weight loss alone, because we know in animal models when GLP-1s have been utilized that it increases total sleep time, so the amount of sleep we get, and it also increases the amount of slow wave sleep, which is kind of our most restorative stage of sleep. So there are other implications that these medications have. So this data literally just came out. They just did the full review of it at the American Diabetes Association conference just 2 weeks ago, and the New England Journal of Medicine, which is a huge, huge journal, just had its first publication about this study. One of my close friends, Atul Malhotra, was the global PI in the study, and I was with him this past weekend, and we were discussing it, and he said, really, he's never seen anything like this. When he was at the ADA and he was giving his talk about this, he said, I've never had some newscasters at a conference, at a medical conference. And he said the first 3 rows were all biotech investors. And so there's clearly a lot of interest around this because we've never had a medication for obstructive sleep apnea. And now this is really going to broaden all of the ways that we can treat people, especially just looking at the statistics in the United States, where 75% of adults are overweight to obese. And 50% of them have said, I've tried weight loss. obesity is a true medical disorder. And so being able to treat to that disorder and having these other complementary benefits to things that occur as a result of it are hugely monumental changes. And the fact that that's preserved, whether you're using CPAP or not, is amazing.
So do you think, though, with this weight loss drug, is the ultimate goal, as it's continued to be studied, that people might not have to use the CPAP machines enough, or is
so
it...
that's a big debate right now.
Okay.
So in fact, when this data was out, if you were to look at some of the stocks of the companies who make CPAPs, they go from up here straight down on the day that this data came out. The reason for that is because that's what everyone is speculating, is that, oh, well, if there's weight loss, we won't need these CPAPs. That is the farthest thing from the truth. The reality is, when looking at obstructive sleep apnea, there are a variety of different drivers as to why a person can have sleep apnea. Not everyone who's overweight or obese has sleep apnea, and not everyone who is overweight and obese with sleep apnea is the weight the only issue driving it. So it is a part of the tools we can utilize, but the reality is we now have medications, we have CPAPs, we have dental devices, we have surgeries, we have other things that are available that allow us just to treat all the patients, not just some of the patients.
Yeah, and the bottom line, I think, with all of this, like, talk to a sleep medicine expert, because
Exactly.
70 disorders exist,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And this is just crazy, though, because,
Yeah.
but like you said, maybe it's going to have more benefits than just weight loss for people, and that's what
Yes.
some of this is leaning toward, right?
Yes, 100%.
Did any of the data show that people ultimately in the study just came out and said, like, their sleep had improved and they weren't on the machines?
So they actually looked at, so a part of staying in the trial is you have to stay on your machine,
Okay.
right? If you were on a machine, you have to stay on the machine, because otherwise that would introduce variables that wouldn't allow you to accurately assess the drug by itself, because now you've changed the experience. But I do think that you will see that potentially. We already know that, for instance, a person who's undergoing bariatric surgery, so that's weight loss surgeries, they all have to be screened for obstructive sleep apnea, because of the fact that if sleep apnea is present in someone undergoing bariatric surgery and it's untreated, it actually can lead to worse outcomes for them after surgery. However, when they have if you have sleep apnea, you're on your CPAP, you get the surgery, we know that after 10% change in body weight, that we want to reanalyze to see, do you still have sleep apnea? Do we need to make changes to your treatment? Because of the fact that we're innately changing your other pathology that may be present.
Let's talk about sleep studies. Have they changed over the past few years? I think back in the day, I think of even when I had one done probably more than a decade ago, you go to a sleep center,
Yep.
they hook you up with all these devices, you're in a weird spot, you got cords on you, and you're like, of course I'm not going to get a great night's sleep because
Sure.
I'm all like jazzed up,
Sure.
looking like you walked out of Star Trek. So
Yeah.
how are sleep studies being conducted now in 2024 to
Sure.
really nail down the accurate data?
So it's interesting, because this is another area where we're constantly trying to say, how do we evolve what we're doing? So in labs, polysomnography is still considered the gold standard, right? It's still considered what you should be doing. There are home sleep tests available. However, when home sleep tests were designed, they were designed to say that I have what's called a high positive predictive value for someone to have obstructive sleep apnea. What does that mean? It means that I get your history, I do your physical exam, and I'm like, 99% you have obstructive sleep apnea. This will get me close enough to seeing your pathology, right? It's kind of getting me in the ballpark, because I don't need to drill it down so tight, because I can get you on a treatment as soon as possible, right? However, we see that insurances have taken that and they have broadened it, where the national utilization of home sleep tests is about 30% of sleep tests that are being done are home sleep tests. In some places, it may even be higher, closer to 50%. However, again, just like we need to personalize therapy for patients, we also need to personalize the testing for patients, because there's variables in an in-lab study that are much more detailed that you can't get with a home study. And so that also is going to play into it. So if I have someone who's very, very obese, their BMI is greater than 40, okay, body mass index is greater than 40, that's someone who I'm going to want to do in the lab, because I'm also going to look at their CO2, their carbon dioxide, because they may have a special form of sleep disorder breathing called obesity hypoventilation syndrome. I'm not going to be able to catch that on a home sleep test. And so I may then cause the wrong treatment for you. What's interesting, however, is that if you look at an in-lab or most home sleep testing, it's one night. And I have already said to you, no one sleeps the same on any 2 nights. So we now are limiting our data. There's studies that have been put out that have demonstrated when we do multi-night studies, it actually gives us more information. That not only gives us more accurate diagnosis for you now, but gives us a better prediction of you developing disease. So when we have these multi-night studies, I can be a better predictor of going, if we don't get this under control, you're going to get high blood pressure. You're going to have a stroke. You're going to have blah, 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 blah. That's our goal in medicine, is to say, how do we use data to drive at better population health initiatives so that this way we can not only treat you right now, but that we are a long-term partner to prevent you from developing more diseases. So this is where we're actually starting to see some of these home devices go, is how do we look more like an in-lab, but then also how do we do this so that a person can re-hook themselves up several nights in a row so that we can actually very, very personalize the therapeutic intervention.
And you mentioned, obviously, obesity and people who face that and sleep apnea and everything else. So let's take a closer look at nutrition, right? And there's a lot of people who, well, maybe they eat their 7 meals a day, they eat 3 meals a day. Some people do intermittent fasting and a big meal at night. I've heard that it's a big myth, like the meal timing of it. But as a sleep expert, do you find that people sleep less if they consume a big meal before bed?
Yeah.
Because a lot of dietitians will be like, meal timing doesn't matter as long as you're staying within that, your calorie goal or whatever.
Yeah. So I would say meal timing is incredibly important. So both the quality of food and your timing of food and the content that you're eating are all incredibly important. So remember I was just talking about GLP-1, and that's going to direct your feeling full, and it's going to interact with orexin, which is in your brain, which is going to influence your sleep. It's all connected. So I was talking about the exposome earlier, and last year at the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, I had spoken about the microbiome. So these are the bugs that live in your belly, right? All of this is important because it has very, very significant implications on not only how your GI system is going to feel for being able to fall asleep. Am I going to have heartburn? Am I going to feel like full and gassy? And is that going to influence my sleep? But it also actually has a very, very heavy influence on your circadian rhythm, because that is a cue that your brain and your body use to say, you should be awake, you should be asleep. So we know that having big, heavy meals right before bed, even though they might make you feel really, really sleepy, are likely to lead to more sleep fragmentation. There's also some data to say that the quality of the foods that you eat, and especially if they're fried, spicy, all of that, may even influence your dreaming content and make it more likely for you to have vivid or not pleasant dreams because of those things. And so it is really important to think about food as another strategy. It is a medication that you can utilize to optimize your day and night. Now, in terms of timing, I'll take it even a point further. You can utilize the timing of your meals as a strategy for jet lag. What do I mean by that? If I'm traveling across time zones and I start to adapt or adopt the use of the timing of meals of the time zone I'm going to, I will have less jet lag when I get there.
So you're saying, picture you leave the East Coast, Pennsylvania, you fly to California. They're 3 hours behind us. Are you saying you still eat your regular meals on Pennsylvania time, or you switch to West Coast time?
West Coast time.
Really? And that impacts what again?
Your circadian rhythm makes you have your better wakefulness during your waking hours and a better ability to go to sleep at the timing that you would be sleeping there.
So for people out there being like, oh, she's saying like don't eat right before you go to bed, like do you have a cutoff window you advise patients?
So most typically we tell people try to limit it at least 2 hours before bedtime. Now
That's
with
tough
that
for some
stated,
people,
I was just going to say, now with that stated, that sometimes is overly restrictive. And so it's always trying to make that balance of how do we actually allow for someone to get all the calories they need, all the things that they need, because I also don't want someone going to bed hungry, because that's not doing you any favors either for sleep.
Yeah.
So I recognize, because I'm a working mom, right? My husband works. We have 2 little kids. They're in all these different activities. Sometimes we're not all getting to eat until 6, 7 o'clock at night. And I want to try and get my kids into bed by 8. And so I can't even honor that 2-hour window. It's then saying, how do I actually give them more nutrient, caloric rich foods earlier in the day, so that maybe the meal at night might be that smaller meal, which is not necessarily typical for the American diet. We generally are using our dinner as our heaviest meal of the day.
We were talking about like the 7 to 9 hours, and if you're over 9 hours as an adult, that might lean toward that you have a sleep disorder of some sort. What about athletes and people who are for recovery?
Yeah. So it's very interesting because athletes right now, especially professional athletes, most of them do have sleep doctors who are part of their like coaching squad, right? And I always like to refer to LeBron James because LeBron James actually has been quoted saying like he needs 12 hours of sleep. 12 hours. And he said it because if he doesn't get that 12 hours, he's not going to be able to perform. Like he utilizes that as a tool for performance. And it's not a joke. It truly is a tool for performance. We know that it changes reaction time, speed, accuracy, judgment. And so with that, if a person is a congenital long sleeper, just like we were talking about congenital short sleepers, people who sleep 5 hours and they don't have a physiologic change. There are some people who they need 9, 10, 11, 12 hours. If they don't have a consequence of that, meaning that if I get my 12 hours and I look great, there's no daytime negative influence, it's not necessarily a sleep disorder. However, socially, most of us can't get 12 hours sleep night to night. So many times those patients will look like a sleep disorder because maybe they're getting 9 hours, but they're sleepy. So therefore, they're experiencing consequence to needing that 12 hours, if that makes sense. Now, with that stated, we do know that it is really important for utilizing sleep as a part of recovery from exercise.
Yeah, say you're lifting 2 hours a day. I like to feel like I'm LeBron James and you're on my coaching team.
Yes.
I'm somebody though who lifts 5 days a week,
Yep.
90 minutes to 2 hours a day.
Yep.
Right? So how do you optimize recovery then? What would you say for somebody like me? Because
So
I'm not LeBron, and I mean most people watching this, they're not like athletes like that.
Yes. So the reality is that for people to realize that sleep contributes in two ways to recovery for you, whether you're a professional athlete or a competitive athlete, or you're doing it for your own wellness and your body health. One of the hormones that our bodies produce, which is really important for muscle mass, is something called growth hormone. Growth hormone is a hormone that actually is produced while we're sleeping, and in fact, during slow wave sleep. Having very regular sleep, appropriate quality of sleep, appropriate quantity of sleep is going to enhance the amount of slow wave sleep that you're spending in, especially if you are exercising and doing a lot during the day. That is thereby only going to produce more growth hormone, which is going to make the exercise and all of the work that you've done even more beneficial for your muscles, right? The second part of it is that we cycle through sleep throughout the night. Non-REM 1, non-REM 2, non-REM 3, REM sleep. Those different stages of sleep offer different contributions to our learning consolidation. So you would say, what does learning have to do with being an athlete? Well, your body is being trained to do certain activities, and that muscle memory, quote unquote muscle memory, is being further reinforced by those different stages of sleep. So our non-REM 2-3 sleep seems to be more implications on what we call our declarative learning. Declarative learning is like 1 + 1 is 2. I can clearly explain that to you. There is some parts of the athletic system where that's relevant, right? I know to do this play because of X, Y, Z, right? That's that judgment, my executive function. However, the ability for me to run faster, jump higher, hit more baseballs, throw for a touchdown, right? That's going to be more so from my REM sleep. My REM sleep is more important for my non-declarative learning, so things like my motor learning, right? And so when we are compromising, cutting down our sleep, curtailing what that quality should be, we're doing ourselves no favors in trying to achieve the outcomes we prioritize or find that are most important to us.
And it's kind of specific to everybody. So you're not going to look at me and be like, for you, it's 9 hours or 8.5.
Yes. So that's something that is really important for people to hear, is that the reason why we quote ranges for sleep is because you can't cookie cut it, right? I tell people all the time, I'm a person who generally try to get 7.5 to 8 hours every single night. My ideal is 8, because even when I get to that 7.5, even though I'm feeling okay, I notice where I have those word finding difficulties, where someone else would talk to me and be like, I don't see anything. The weeks I'm on call, for instance, I'm like, the thing that gets put on their head, where we're looking at the brain waves, and my residents are like, EEG, Dr. Morse? And I'm like, yes, that. It's I know what I want to say, I just can't get the word out, right? And so that is giving clear illustration. When you become more self-aware to how sleep impacts you and how you can utilize it as a tool, you now start utilizing it as a tool. I always tell people, it's not uncommon for me to hear things like, I really need to move to Florida. I sleep amazing when I'm in Florida. it's not that Florida makes you sleep better. It's that you went to Florida on vacation, you had no other responsibilities, and you allowed your body to have the sleep that it needed. And therefore, you got a glimpse of what the best version of you looks like. And so take that as a tip for you to lean into and say, I like me better this way. Let me use sleep as a tool. So whether I'm in Florida or Pennsylvania, New York, California, that I am always consistently the best version of who I can be.
And you mentioned California, so if you, because you travel like everywhere when you're giving lectures, talks, conferences, if you go to California, say your bedtime here is normally, I don't know, 9 o'clock.
Yeah.
What time are you going to bed in California?
You know what? It's very interesting because many times I disappoint people who I promise I'm going to go to dinner with when I go to California.
You're like, I'm out.
I'm like, I'm like, I'm sorry, I know it's 6 o'clock, but I'm getting ready for bed because I can barely keep my eyes open.
So is that how you game it? Do you stay on your East Coast?
So it depends. So really, it depends on how long someone's going to be where they're at, right? And do you have responsibilities that you have to?
Because you said to eat on West Coast time. So what
Yes.
time are you sleeping? If you're an East Coast person, what time are you sleeping on the West Coast?
So let's say I'm going to the West Coast and I'm going to be there for 1 to 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
If I don't have nighttime responsibilities, meaning like I don't have to go to a dinner or a meeting late or whatever else, I'm just going to stay on my East Coast time. Because it doesn't make sense for me for 3 days to shift.
What if it's a week and a half?
So if it's a week and a half, then I'm going to adapt those strategies. And I may even use melatonin to help in facilitating that even more, to help me to phase shift so that I'm able to get on that time schedule and be on that for that week and a half.
And then if you come back, how do you get back on PA time?
Same thing. I'm going to get ready. So on the plane, I'm going to potentially say, I know that you're going to give me food or you're going to give me snacks. I'm not going to have those because of the fact that you're giving me the cues based on California and I need to be the cues on Pennsylvania.
I love that. It's
Yeah.
like one knowledge bomb after the other with you.
Yeah.
For people, because sleep science has really only started to blow up since the 70s,
Mm-hmm.
where can people go just to learn the latest data when it drops? What's a reputable sites that you recommend?
Sure. So as a part of Geisinger, I've created a couple of programs, Sleep to Be Well and Wake Up and Learn, and we have a growing number of resources that are on the Geisinger website that help you to be in control of your own sleep journey. And we're trying to grow those resources so that people can really engage in the behavior change, because I'm a really big advocate of people being empowered in their own journeys. Outside of that, I would also encourage sleepeducation.org. It's the American Academy of Sleep Medicine. You can't get more reputable than the American Academy of Sleep Medicine. The National Sleep Foundation also has some really great resources. The American Sleep Apnea Association, sleephealth.org, they really are putting out a great message now of talking sleep health first, even though they're a sleep apnea organization. And then finally, also Project Sleep. Project Sleep actually even has the sleep hotline. So if you're a person watching this and you think that you might have sleep struggles, you're not in the Geisinger area, and you can't utilize any of our resources for some reason, you can call this hotline and they can start providing you some direction as well.
I love that. And the thing is, for people who are just obsessed with the sleep topic, this is, in addition that we're friends, this is why I follow your podcast.
Yes.
What's the podcast again?
It's Sleeping Around, the podcast.
Got it. And the easiest way for people to follow you on social media, what are your handles?
It's DAMM Good Sleep, and DAMM stands for Dr. Marie Morse.
Yeah, DAMM.
M.
That's right.
Yes.
Got it.
Yes.
Damn good sleep. Anything you want to add that I didn't ask you? I mean, gosh, we could talk forever. I think the last thing that just hit me before we wrapped, because somebody asked me the other day, sleep cycles, how long do they take?
So most typically 90 to 120 minutes.
90 to 120
However,
minutes.
in younger kids between 0 and 5, they can be as short as 50 to 60 minutes.
And coming back to it, because when I had this conversation with somebody, so if you do wake up and you say you finish the sleep cycle and then maybe you only have like another half hour, instead of going back down to try to restart the sleep cycle, just get out of bed?
So that's definitely what I do. If I wake up and I'm feeling like I'm ready to start today, and sometimes I do that even if it's 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and I am feeling so awake and energized, and I'm laying there for 20 minutes, and I'm unable to fall back to sleep, and I'm just like, you know what? I'm going to just lean into the fact that I'm awake, because I might have woken up at 4 or 5 anyway, because that's going to only help me to be so exhausted that night that I'm going to fall asleep and I'm going to have a really good sleep that night. So sometimes it is not beneficial for you to lean into the frustration that feels like I'm vulnerable to something I can't control. Be in control. Exercise control at all times. And that control starts with you choosing, I'm going to start my day, or I'm going to allow myself this next 20 minutes to do something that is allowing me to wind down and potentially fall asleep. And if you can't, get out of bed. potentially go and start your day and recognize by you starting your day, by you choosing, you've already chosen not to start your day with frustration on a negative foot. You're choosing to start on a positive foot, and that is only going to allow you to feel more exhausted that night, which is going to encourage you to have a better night's sleep that night.
I love it. Anything else before we wrap?
I would just say what we've highlighted earlier, which is making sure that when people are thinking about their sleep and if they want to do their own inventory, even though there's over 70 disorders, you don't need to know all those disorders. All you need to know is your own personalized experience, and if you're finding that you're having frustrations or difficulties with the quality, the quantity, or the timing and regularity of your sleep, if you do a symptom diary and keep track of that over a week or two, that now allows you to go to your doctor with information that allows them to personalize the diagnostic and treatment pathway that's only going to get you to your best night's sleep sooner so that you can have better nights for better days.
Boom! I love hanging out with you. Dr. Marie Morse, a sleep medicine specialist and a pediatric neurologist.
Yes.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
And follow her.
Yes.
Sleeping Around, that's the podcast.
That's the podcast.
Follow her on social media, Damn Good Sleep.
Yes.
And you can also look her up on Geisinger's website. You
Yes.
have not only sleep information there, but people, if they want to contact you.
Yeah, 100%.
For anything,
Yes.
right?
Yes,
Who
always
knows?
happy to help.
All right. Are you still taking new patients?
Always am.
There you go. All right. The one and only. Thanks so
you.
much, Dr. Marie Morse. And thank you for being a part of another episode of The Ryan Leckey Show. Now go to sleep.
Not right now, though.
Here we go, buddy.